was sort of inevitable. There was no budget to maintain the place, so it was something called recycling. The materials were being put to better use, but it wasn't particularly good to have that on the front page of the Washington Post. The image in America is you don't loot. The Philippine Air Force was assigned to the security of Clark, but it really didn't have the capability or the budget to take care of that any more than Subic had the $100 million budget to maintain Subic, although they organized volunteers. You know that story there under the former Mayor Dick Gordon to do their best until they got some locators. So Subic prospered. Subic got the World Bank loan, $30 million, I recall. The loan was used to upgrade the runway, and in came FedEx as an anchor tenant, and in came Acer as an anchor tenant, and you know the story at Subic. But the reason I was so depressed on that day in March of 1992 when I visited here was because nothing was happening. I'd been used to Clark. We would bring senior visitors up here to the 13th Air Force headquarters, and the commanding general of the 13th Air Force would give the usual briefing. The Red Air Forces of North Korea and China and Vietnam were up there in an arc across the north of Asia, and then the Allied Air Forces of SINCPAC-AF and the Thais and the Japanese and the South Koreans were in blue in the south, and that building now is where CDC is. And Clark was extremely busy with 20,000 U.S. military personnel, with 30-some thousand Filipino employees, with families on base and off base, with aircraft landing constantly. And to come from that to a place covered in ash with no activity was really depressing. But there was one activity. 3 holes of the golf course had been cleared of ash. There were caddies and golfers. So that says something about the Philippine military following a tradition of American military, because you go to American military bases and you'll find golf courses. I'll make an aside. I'm an Army brat. I grew up in the U.S. Army in various bases. And don't think that American military are conservative. Dennis, you'll agree, it's a very socialized organization. You get discounted haircuts, you get discounted movie theaters, you get golf courses and everything else, and generous retirement benefits. But that was Clark in the past and Subic in the past. This was the largest U.S. air base outside the United States. Dramatic changes occurred. There had been assassinations here. People who've lived here a long time will recall what happened at the gates of Clark one afternoon when 4 American enlisted personnel during the shift were in traffic. These assassins came up. They went by women who were driving the cars because they weren't going to go after women. They went by African Americans and they assassinated 4 enlisted men. That was a decision of the Central Committee of the NDF to use that technique for their advocacy of getting the American military out of the country. Maybe they were working on a long-term plan to capture the West Philippine Sea. That certainly is the contemporary connection with what was going on. But in truth, they were copying the mouse, and they're still copying the mouse. There are not so many of them around Central Luzon anymore. And of course, they're way out of date. Like many things in the Philippines, they're way out of date. If they played catch-up, they'd all be seeking jobs at call centers in the Philippines, in Clark, at Sutherland and others. But they're probably not qualified for that. So I'm being nostalgic. I've been coming here for years. I'm going to be 70 next month, and I expect to continue to come here. I'm not qualified to be in the cemetery that Clark Global City is supporting because I wasn't in the military, but I assure you I will spend the afterlife in the Philippines. It's my home. I also should say my other connection with Clark is that my wife has a carpet factory here. And I'll make an advertisement for, not that I'm selling carpets, but you should be aware that the quality of the carpets is the world's best. And the customers for these carpets are the world's richest. And they include Bill Gates, they include palaces in Kuwait and around the Gulf states, they include the best hotels in the world, they're the best carpets in the world. They're quite expensive, I should say, New Zealand wool and Filipino labor. But there's a factory right here at the Filixel industrial estate. By the way, Filixel was the first locator at Clark. Back when there was a lot of ash around, they came in. The owners in New York had been invited by Ambassador Pelaez and President Ramos to come in. I was President Aquino, actually, at that time, to come in and take a look and make an investment here. They were the largest company at the time in garment exports in the Philippines. And I think they made a good decision when it was very difficult to make that kind of decision because it's very difficult to see the future. And Clark Global City is a complement or a successor to that early investor who also has a vision for what the future can hold. And as you can see from the success of Filixel, which is pretty full here now, the lesson is to see the future and have the patience to realize the future. You cannot come into the Philippines, make an effort, and then expect instant results. You have to be patient. You have to have a long-term perspective, and in almost all cases, that will pay off. I want to divert and tell you about Arrancada, because I'm up here in my position as working with the Joint Foreign Chambers, and I want to tell you about a book whose recommendations can affect the success of your businesses. Four years ago, 300 investors, Filipino and domestic, met in a series of 9 focus group discussions, and Clark was represented in the one on airports. In fact, I see the representative walking by, and he rather, you remember in the focus group discussion we had in Makati, the passion of people arguing for the travelers who happen to live sort of north of the Pasig River, as opposed to the people living south of the Pasig River. I guess the Guadalupe Bridge is the dividing line in this. And those of us living in Makati, of course, we're thinking we just zip over to Naia, and that's our airport of choice. But suddenly we became aware that for an equal population, and I think there's a slide that Chicos had presented down in Makati a few months ago that showed the basin, or the catchment basin of the population, and it's very telling that you have, and it's a huge number of people that are living north, in the northern part of Manila, which is a huge megalopolis, and up into Central Luzon, and if you compare that to the huge number of people that are living in the southern part of the national capital region going down to Quezon province, you have large populations, which is an argument later on that I would make for having a dual airport strategy. Let's forget about what you read in the paper about a single airport. In fact, the guy who got me into this today, Ben Solis, is in the Inquirer today talking to the press about this issue. Arrancada is on a website, arrancadaphilippines.com. You can read about it. And what we do is we advocate 470 reforms that were made by these investors. So in that sense, the investors represent you, private sector, companies doing business in the Philippines in 7 big winner sectors: agribusiness, creative industries, business processing, infrastructure, manufacturing, mining, tourism. 7 big winter sectors. These are very familiar to my friend at the BOI because they're really the same sectors that are in the investment priority plan. I'm not going to pull a Senator Soto and say I plagiarized Faye. I think we're partners in this and we see the same vision together. We have the same crystal ball. But our conclusion was that if these recommendations are put into effect, we could generate 75 billion in foreign investment. Of course, you get a lot of domestic investment too, and an estimated 10 million jobs and 1 trillion pesos in revenue for the government over a period of about 10 years. Now that's beginning to happen. We also had a sub-motto, twice as fast, because arrancada means to accelerate. Everybody here speaks Ilocano only, or Pump? If anybody here speak Tagalog, then I understand arrancada. Lilia de Lima said it's what a jeepney driver says, right? He's going up a hill in first gear, and he's about to stall. So he downshifts and gives it the gas, and he goes, arrancada. Well, I see another friend, Bernie. Hi, here's Dr. Bernie Villegas from the University Asian Pacific and a Harvard PhD in economics. He has a much more interesting story to tell you than I have, so maybe I should wind up here quickly. I mentioned our website. We have had over 38,000 unique visitors from 144 countries, but 75% of them come from the Philippines, and then the next large group is the United States. We have a big event, and some of you, if you're in Manila, I encourage you to come. It's 8:30 to 2 in the ballroom of the Shangri-La. Last year, the President was with us. This year, the President is campaigning. Our keynote speaker is the Speaker of the House, Sonny Belmonte of Quezon City, if you haven't heard him. He's got a very strong story to tell about legislative successes in the Congress that is about to finish. And we have Secretary of Tourism, Secretary of Trade, NCC, Co-Chairman Bill Luce, and 30 other speakers. So if you can come down in Manila, I know that, Chicos, you signed up. I hope you're able to come and join us, and we'll put you right up there at the front table with all the other VIPs. The reason I talk about arrancada, because this bears on the future of Clark. What happens in the growth of the economy overall, what happens particularly in Central Luzon, and you realize that this is the higher income area, the higher growth area of the entire country, affects Clark. So some of these sectors are going to be at Clark, some of them are going to be around Clark. All of them certainly should be included in the Aerotropolis concept that Mr. Brady is explaining later today. And we have specific recommendations for each of these sectors. Agribusiness, business process outsourcing, which is already here, creative industries, which I suspect is, if anybody sings, anybody dances, anybody, in the future there will be a Psy doing the Philippine Gangnam style, or whatever the copy of that is going to make the same success around the world. So you get an idea about creative industries. There's a lot of talent there, and the Congress has just passed a bill for the Design Council. I'll be going to the President shortly. Yeah. Infrastructure, we have many, many issues there. We have a whole panel on this next week. Airports is important, power, roads and rail, seaports, telecom, water. Manufacturing and logistics, well, that's right up the alley of Clark. You have that already, and you have potential, huge potential. Not sure about mining. Sorry, how do I go backwards? Mining. There's a bit of a hiatus on that right now, but hopefully it may not affect your area here immediately, but it is important to the country as a whole. And tourism, which including medical travel and retirement, are extremely important for Clark in the future, important today. I'm sure you have profiles of the people that are flying on the aircraft coming in here, and whether they're business people or whether they're tourists or whether they're Balikbayans or OFWs, etc. We have a general area called business costs, or the business environment, which is about a dozen things that affect the climate of all these other big sectors. And the costs, you all know what the costs are if you're in business. And some of them are good, like rents. Some of them are not so good, like power or telecommunications. We're worried about the environment and natural disasters. Governance, big issue. It was only 20 years ago that the head of the World Bank used the big C word, corruption. We used to call it governance. Well, I still call it governance, but it means corruption. Number one problem for investors in the country, until recently. No longer number one problem, but it could in the future again be the number one problem. Number two problem was infrastructure. That's now number one problem. Judicial, there are quite a few, sorry, moving, pushing it. Anybody control it by the next slide, by hand? Oh, okay. Judicial, I won't go in again in the book. Justice is slow, justice is unpredictable. If I have a chance to talk about used car smuggling, front page showing the BOC commissioner up in Santa Ana municipality, and today it's a case of slow justice and other things. Legislation, we do a lot of work on legislation with the House and Senate and with Philippine business groups, with Makati Business Club, MAP, PCCI, large range of groups. We're happy to hear from you about legislative needs, amendments to laws, new laws that you may be interested in. Macroeconomic policy, including trade policy, such future-cutting trade agreements as the ASEAN Economic Community, as the Trans-Pacific Partnership, as the EU, the Philippine bilateral FTA, and of course social services, which include education, major reforms in this government. It's taken 75 years to increase high school to 12 years since the American Commonwealth period, but it's going to happen. Health and population, to expand, fill health out to everybody in the country, not just make it a middle-class entitlement. Population, Bernie, with all due respect, reproductive health with some compromises. The issue has been legislatively resolved at least. We have a disagreement on it. We're great friends, but and that's we're all well aware of the different points of view because they were well articulated. And poverty, the CCT program, the fact that with the high population, because of corruption in the past, poor governance, that the poverty level here is very persistent. As I said earlier, I see Subic and Clark as a single region. I think we should keep this in mind. You've seen the map before. You live here. You know of the connections. But the U.S. left a treasure to the Philippines when Pinatubo erupted, and then after the political eruption of the Philippine Senate, whether they're called the Dirty Dozen or the Dozen Heroes, depending on where you sit. The U.S. military left. The physical facilities were not removed. If they cost $6 or $8 billion to taxpayers like Mr. Wright and myself, and Mr. Brady are too young to have paid taxes in that period, but we paid our taxes, and some of them came back here to build and maintain these facilities, which now are a heritage for the Philippine government to protect and develop. In this slide, which I used at Subic, I point out the underutilization of the two terminals, Phase 1 and Phase 2, of the container terminal that's over at QB Point in Subic, which have a capacity of 600,000 TEUs annually, better utilized in 2010 at only 4%. Now that's an underinvestment. That's a plan of the government to use the port of Subic, but without a policy to actually get the cargo there. And it's a deep water port. We had similar, what we're doing here, and this is one of the, in fact, we were with the Secretary of Transportation yesterday talking these issues, is something Bangkok faced before, something Saigon faced before. All of these cities in Southeast Asia grew up at river mouths. There were no roads. The oceans were the rivers. And now they're large cities like Bangkok and Ho Chi Minh and Manila. And yet, you're still using the ports in the middle of the city. Now, Bangkok capped the Bangkok port and built a new port in Lam Chabang. Same thing in Ho Chi Minh. They capped the port of Saigon, which is right in the middle of the city, if you recall, and built a new one, a deep water port at Cat Lai. Philippines is not doing that. The president opened berth 6 at the International Container Terminal at the Manila port last year. And there's a contract to do berth 7. And you saw in the paper this week, BPA talking about filling in another 200 hectares and having a bulk oil port. Now that doesn't make sense because you guys don't have traffic here at Clark. But every Saturday, those of us who live in Makati and try to go to downtown Manila face a caravan of 40-foot trucks moving slowly. And we have 40% of the traffic in Manila is attributable to the congestion that comes from using that port. There's a perfectly good port at Batangas and a perfectly good port at Subic. And Subic is a deep water port. Subic can take Panamax freighters, which cannot come into Manila port. The big ones, maybe not post-Panamax, which is the next generation, but the cost of shipping in the Philippines can come down $300 per container, 40-footer, to go to the United States if you can get the larger ships in. But you can't get the larger ships in without the volume of exports. Now, you're starting that volume of exports here at Clark with Yokohama, huge exporter. If you can duplicate that 10 or 20 times, you'll start to use Subic more. It doesn't make sense to go into Manila to export. So there are lessons from Thailand and Vietnam which we must follow here. You decongest by building new port capacity away from the urban centers. Well, we've done that. Supporting road infrastructure must connect the new ports to the export manufacturing zones. Well, we've done that. The road all the way down to the port of Batangas, these SLEX, and we've done it to Subic. And we will, in the next 3 years, have the connector between SLEX and NLEX. And after that, we'll have C6. So that road infrastructure is going in. But we don't have the incentives to fully utilize the capacity of the new ports, not yet. We're working on it. And then to actually, through policy, administrative or otherwise, cap the port and use the Port of Manila increasingly for tourism. You have 3 National Museum buildings. You have Intramuros. You can have cruise ships coming into that area for a shopping and cultural destination. That vision is there, but the execution is slowly coming. Now, Clark and Subic started off in the middle of disaster. It's nice, I just got a 15-minute warning, which is very helpful, rather than the 5-minute warning when you're halfway through your speech. If you can read these headlines, they come from 1996 and 1997. FedEx Subic hub opens flight routes. Acer opens biggest plant outside Taiwan. Hutchinson asked court to stop rebidding. Well, Hutchinson never came. It went to Mr. Razon, who had better connections at Malacanang then, and I don't know about now. But then World Bank to release additional $60 million loan. Subic Bay appears to thrive in Richard Gordon's wake, 98. If I recall, Dick didn't want to leave and that wake is not, Dick is still very much alive. It's not that kind of a wake. He's running on the UNA ticket. World-class port soon to rise in Subic. Well, it did. It's there. The hardware is there. The software is not there yet. Okay, there. Thank you. Now, things got, in 97 crisis, things got a little bit tough for Subic, and they turned to smuggling, and they're still smuggling. 180,000 used cars came in, and I'll show you the effect on the legitimate auto manufacturing industry of that. Petroleum still comes in. Estimated 30 billion pesos losses in petroleum imports at Subic. Drugs, there have been, and more recently, rice. This is going on. Smuggling is going on in the country. It's on the front page of the Inquirer today. The effect of the inability to control the used cars, if you notice, these slides show new automotive manufacturing, right? Thailand is now over 1 million cars a year. Philippines today is 100 and Philippines is a small, right? Thailand has grown. Philippines is flat. $2 billion in investment in the Philippine manufacturing industry has been weakened by an illegal activity. Maybe it's technically legal because you can get a court here to keep it legal for quite a while. As I said, the front page news today. The Commissioner of Customs yesterday, was in northern Luzon checking out whether the Supreme Court decision of January 7 applies to the cars that are being sold out there. This is deja vu for me because I was at Subic with 30 diplomats and business people. Faye will recall this, in October 2007, and they were slapping yellow stickers on 3,000 cars when the Supreme Court said, can't you read the language in EO 156? It says you can't import these. Well, those 3,000 cars subsequently slipped out into the general economy. They're all gone. The reason I'm talking about this somewhat is because you've got to be in the future in an Aerotropolis really, really clean. You've got to follow the rules. The investors need to expect that. They can't see smuggling of products that they're engaged in manufacturing, of selling, trading, logistics, etc., in the economy, competing with them. We have recommendations. I won't go through this here about Subic because I want to move on to Clark and then get to the end of this talk. The worst time, I said the worst of times, worst time at Clark. I wasn't born in 1941. Anybody in the room who's 73? Anybody who remembers how MacArthur left Clark exposed and didn't take protective action to get the planes off the ground? You've all seen the photographs. So the worst time here, I'm sure, was during the Second World War. But Pinatubo came pretty close to it. I'm sure there are people in the room here that remember that situation. I have a memory of being at the State Department on a Saturday morning with a speakerphone and having Richard...
Your DOT would love to see that. And if you look at that map, the one with the encircled one is the exact location of the proposed Locos terminal. The entire area assigned to the Locos terminal is 64 hectares, so that you can have a terminal that can have as much as 30 million passengers throughput and a parking bay of about 36 parking bays for any expansion of the airlines. Again, with the aid of US8, Clark has hired consultants to do a financial and conceptual study of the budget terminal for submission to NEDA as a first step in later on the construction of. As you can see, that shows conceptually the parking bays. Since it's a low-cost terminal, you don't have the sophisticated gate. It is designed to appear, and it will have 16 parking bays with 2 parking bays that is good for wide-body aircraft at the end. The terminal, as you can see, has a floor space of only 18,300 square meters. It is designed for faster processing of passengers from the entry gates back to the boarding gates. As you can see, if you look at it, that portion over there, you have about 68 check-in counters. At the entrance, you have 10 X-ray machines that will process the passenger much faster. We are trying to achieve the IATA Level 2 service of processing passengers within 15 minutes from entry to the boarding gates. It's friendly. You'll have even 2 parking buildings where you can park and fly, and you can walk from that building all the way to your boarding gates over-covered. As you can see, we have a 4-lane road surrounding the parking bays so that the arrival and the departure traffic will not clash with each other. You look at the profile of the terminal, you will see that you can walk from the parking all the way to your boarding gates without being under the elements. And of course, as usual, SEAC management is always having their forward thinking. They know that as they grow, accessibility to Clark will become an issue. So they have talked to Ayala Land, and they jointly put up a bus terminal system in Trinoma. This is a first step to having a full city check-in, like you see in Hong Kong and some of the big cities. With Trinoma and its location, that air passenger terminal will be 1 hour away from Clark International Airport. Again, like we said, the idea of being 1 hour away can be met without very huge investment. If you go to Taipei and the Taoyuan Airport, you will see that airport now has a capacity of over 50 million. It is serviced by 15-minute interval efficient bus service going down to Taiwan. I take it almost every month because I'm always there that often. There are some of the bus companies that are serving it now. Very cheap, 200 pesos one way. That's cheaper than any taxi you take in Metro Manila to go to NAIA. So what are the next steps? Simple. 2013, full implementation of the land use plan. Let the private sector participate in the development of the airport. In many airports, 70% of its earnings are not really out of aeronautical expenses, aeronautical revenues. They're also always gained from the other commercial establishments that are located within the airport complex. Phase 2 expansion of Terminal 1. It is very important, as you can see in my earlier slides. Even at Phase 2, expansion of the present terminal, you will only have a capacity of 4 to 4.5 million when the airlines are trying to get to 6 million capacities already quite quickly this year. Then, of course, completion of the feasibility and financial studies of the budget terminal to be submitted to NEDA, hopefully within the first quarter, to avoid, anyway, the slow pace that comes through with government during an election year. 2014, the budget terminal should be bidded out under the public-private partnership or PP program, so that in 2.5 years, at what the engineers say, you will have a 15 million terminal in Clark. And then, of course, again, trying to anticipate the future, we must complete a study for a full cargo terminal. Joe, if you look at what the airlines are trying to do, you'll have about 100 flights a day operating in Clark, somewhere between 2015 to 2016. So even if you are only being serviced by an Airbus 320, even on full load, an Airbus 320 can still carry between 1 to 1.5 tons. If you have 100 flights a day, you'll have 100 tons going, you'll have 100 tons coming in. That's 200 tons of cargo possible a day. You need a cargo terminal to process it. We have 70 hectares of a designed cargo village that the terminal can be constructed. Then, of course, 2017, hopefully, completion of the budget terminal first phase. And 2018, when all of these other things, smaller things are done, then somebody can sit down and conceptualize the start of a giant gateway terminal. So it's really time to change. It's really time to think of change. I quote from the book, Aerotropolis. It says, from one of the contributors, Mr. Alvin Toffler, the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. And from the author himself, John Casarda, I would like to quote, "There is no magic bullet in economic transformation. True transformation comes about when people across and within all sectors of government, education, business, and industry, not for profit, arts, or culture, come together in genuine partnership for the common good. It comes about when bureaucratic impediments are swept aside. It comes about when the intertwined with basic improvements, a few bold experiments are launched. And it comes about when the public and private sectors come together to invest the resources needed to stimulate transformation." Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming and thank you for listening.
Well, Ben, that was a fantastic update and overview on what the latest scenario is, setting the record straight, as you called it, and also some fantastic vision into plans and potential for the future. We're going into the public sector panel discussion now, so I'd like you to hold your questions for Ben. We'll invite the panelists up, and Ben has kindly agreed to stay up here and take your questions as you may have them. But this is very exciting. We have, as John set out for us, we have this legacy that we inherited, this infrastructure, fantastic infrastructure here, ready and waiting, and we're making great progress in capitalizing on that, but more to be done and maybe some acceleration in that progress. So what we've got for you now is a panelist of public sector leaders to come up and share their thoughts and take your questions, and I invite questions and comments on this whole future for Clark as the Aerotropolis of Asia's future. I should remind you that after lunch we will have, from the horse's mouth, the insights into Aerotropolis and twin airport cities and what this all means and how it unfolds from one of the co-authors of the book. But for now, we'll do the public sector panel discussion. We have 4 panelists going to come and join Ben here. I'd like to introduce them and invite them up one by one. And I'll start with the lady on the panel, if I may. So we have Ms. Faye Agoncillo Reyes. She's head of the Investments Promotion Group at the Board of Investments. You will see from your brochure a distinguished public sector career. She's responsible for the investments generation for the Philippines, strategic promotion into the country, and assets in the formulation of industrial policies. Faye, thank you for joining the panel, please. You will see a distinguished career here, Executive Director of the Centre of International Trade Expositions and Missions, Assistant Secretary for International Trade, Executive Director of Garments and Textile Export Board. So a wealth of experience in the public sector. Thank you for joining the panel. Also on the panel, the man that is responsible for It's More Fun in the Philippines, Honorary Ramon Jimenez, Secretary for the Department of Tourism. He's the man behind this tagline. He is the man behind the tagline, but he's not with us at the moment. We have somebody representing him. Okay, but it is more fun in the Philippines, and we have 133 destinations on Emirates from October the 1st. So my apologies for that. Representing the Secretary of Tourism, we have the Assistant Secretary for the Department of Tourism, Benito Benjon Jr. So Benito, please. And, thirdly on the panel, we have Attorney Arnel Casanova, President and CEO of the Basis Conversion and Development Authority. Another distinguished track record here. Of note is that he's received the Philippine Legion of Honor Medal, a very high distinguishment there. And he was also chosen by the Asia Society in New York as one of the top 21 Asia young leaders for the future. So let's welcome Attorney Arnold Casanova. And then to finally join the panel, we have a distinguished professor, very impressive academic qualifications here. Dr. Bernardo Villegas is a professor at the University of Asia and the Pacific. He specializes in development economics, business economics, and social economics. As mentioned earlier, he's a Harvard PhD. He's also a visiting professor at the IESC Business School in Barcelona and a professor, as I said, at the University of Asia and Pacific. So these are our public sector panelists. Please give them all a welcome, and we'll express our gratitude to them for joining us today. I'm going to have to do a bit of a switch around, but that's probably not bad for me because I need more exercise. I'm what's called a wide body craft. As we know, they'll be coming in soon in October. So what I'd like to do, we've heard Ben's setting out some plans for the future. What I'd like to do is invite each of our 4 public sector panelists to give us some opening comments, just a couple of minutes, on how they see the potential, what is being done for the Philippines aviation industry generally, but specifically for Clark from the aviation sector, specifically here in Clark. And if I may, I'd like to invite ladies first, if that's okay, and ask Faye to start us off with some opening comments. Thank you, Faye.
Good morning, everyone. I'm glad to be here in Clark, especially that I see Chisha Sosiano and Captain Solis, who we were together at the air negotiating panel for 6 years, and we were insisting all the time that Clark should appear in all air services agreements. And so I'm glad that from one flight a day, you have about 21 flights. And I'm heartened to note that when I was speaking to Secretary Jimenez, that you're building another terminal, a tent, just to accommodate the huge influx of tourists. We're glad to hear that. Now, from the point of view of investments, John Forbes is right. There's been such an influx of investors coming into the country. Last year alone was like twice the year before that. So about over 500 investors that we talk to on a daily basis. And that translated to about, just for BOI and PEZA alone, about 15 billion in investment approvals. What is particular for Clark is that Clark is included, and aviation and logistics is included in the industry roadmap that the BOI has initiated. So we're really looking at the promotion of Clark as not only as a logistics hub, but a manufacturing hub as well. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Faye. I think we'll probe a little bit more into this industrial aspect, manufacturing and logistics, as we get into the panel discussion. Benito, obviously some great things happening from the tourism perspective. Share with us your thoughts.
Thank you. First of all, allow me to extend my warmest congratulations to the organizers. This is very timely because when you look at the National Tourism Development Plan, a key strategy that is embodied is the promotion of international access and connectivity. And this is exactly what this conference seeks to achieve. I must also congratulate SIAC. I don't think there's any airport authority in the country, and please don't quote me, that works harder or more aggressively than Clark International Airport Corporation. I've been with Mr. Luciano in a few international events, and I can confidently say that the effort that he has exerted has set the benchmark, and something that we hope the other airport authorities can emulate. Certainly, the development of Clark Airport will play a very crucial role in our drive to achieve 10 million foreign visitors by 2016. Right now, we're seeing a bigger role for Clark, both as a gateway and as a destination in itself. And I'm hopeful that over the next couple of days, we can map out specific steps on how we can get more flights here into Clark. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Benito. Arnel, from the basis conversion perspective, done some fantastic progress in recent years. What's coming up next?
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me here, and I'd like to congratulate the organizers for coming up with this conference. I think it's about time, and we should have more of this. I think on the part of BCDA, being the landowner of all the Clark and the other former U.S. military bases, we are wrapping up actually the development of the Bonifacio Global City. If you've seen that, it used to be an army camp, which is now the premier central business district. And we're moving towards the full development of Clark as a metropolitan area. And we're actually wrapping up the master planning of the unutilized and idle lands in Clark. And we see the fast development in the region, particularly we're looking at utilizing the airport and the seaport of Subic, serving the new metropolis. The area of the new city would be about 8,800 hectares, but this would be on a 30-year phase development. And we're looking at bringing in government centers, educational institutions. I've seen it earlier in the presentation. We're actually trying to attract also educational institutions to come into the city. And so that you could see, I think in the next 10 years, the Clark would eventually evolve into a new metropolitan district. And this would be a green and intelligent city. We have partnered with the Cisco and Centros, who's been doing the ICT infrastructure in Songdo actually, and we have partnered also with Urban Land Institute to look into the master plan that we've done so far. We have partnered with the Philippine Green Building Council to come up with the standards and rating system for the green building development. So I think it's the biggest project that we have so far now. And BCDA is right in the heart of developing and unlocking the values provided in our mandate, which allows us to develop all the infrastructures and utilities within these special economic zones. The infrastructure in Subic, Clark, John Hay, Poro Point, and these former U.S. military bases were actually done by BCDA. ECITEX was a project of BCDA. And the way we see it with the good governance advocacy of the President, and good governance being one of the major challenges in public infrastructure implementation, I think we have a chance to really implement these projects fast. And I think the key is really the clarity of vision, the execution, and actually a determined action and the organization to come towards the success of any implementation. So I think we're right on the right track. We're doing it already. Actually, most of the presentations being done is already being started. So we see this as we move forward to the next years. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Arnel. Thank you. I hope you're thinking of some questions to put to our esteemed panelists. Before we do that, Dr. Bernardo, you're a specialist in development economics, amongst many other things. Could you give us your perspective on what's being done for Clark Aviation and what more could be done?
Thank you very much. I'd like to say first that I'm the odd man out. I don't work for the government. Therefore, if I say something critical of the government, please quote me. But first of all, I will say a lot of good things about the government. First, let me assure, especially those of you who are coming from other countries, that this 7 to 8% growth rate that we will be seeing this year. So my forecast for 2013 is 8% of GDP growth. Now that growth rate is sustainable for the next 20 years thanks to the governance reforms that we are seeing in this present government. The President is really building on many other reforms before him. He says very humbly that he's just standing on the shoulders of all the other presidents who have come. So don't think that everything we can attribute to President Nonoy Aquino. But what he has added is the final touch, good governance. And that is why we are now attracting all of these investors mentioned by Fe. And what I'd like to do, and I purposely wore this batik barong, so it's a combination, a fusion between Indonesia and the Philippines, is to remind you that by 2015, we are beginning the most exciting experiment of a common market among 10 countries in the ASEAN. What happened in the last century to the European community will be happening to this region in the next 20 years. So just think back. After the Second World War, Germany was devastated, France was devastated, Italy was devastated. They had the common sense to put together a common market, which evolved into the EEC. They just made one mistake. They adopted a common currency. We will not make that mistake, but we will make a common market. In the same way that by the end of the last century, Europe, because of the EEC, was strong enough to challenge the US and Japan in economic supremacy. The ASEAN, with 600 million consumers, in 10 to 20 years, will be strong enough to challenge China and India for supremacy in this region. And it's what I would like you to consider when you talk about the Aerotropolis, that Clark is a perfect center for the Philippines to integrate into this ASEAN. First of all, it will have to be VIP. Vietnam, Indonesia, in the Philippines. The three largest economies that are considered as emerging markets in the list of the next 11 by Goldman Sachs. These are the most attractive sites for investment in the ASEAN. And then, of course, including the others. The problem with Thailand is aging too fast for a poor country. It's already suffering labor shortages. While Indonesia, the Philippines, and Vietnam are still enjoying what is called the demographic dividend, and we will have that at least for the next 20 years. Now, I said something critical. I think our government should forget talks about Cavite, Bulacan as an alternative. They're just confusing the foreigners. And I'm not saying this to please you people here. I've said this in other fora in Manila. There's absolutely no sense about talking about Cavite, Bulacan. They have no runways to talk about. And I'm going to say something probably very controversial. Even if the Secretary of Transport Industry comes from Cavite, we should not talk about Cavite. No. So, I can be very frank, precisely because I work for a private think tank. Now, why should we talk about Clark? Because, as Fe already mentioned, there is a very visible trend that a lot of Japanese, Korean, and China-based factories are now moving to the Philippines. You talk to Lilia de Lima. She cannot cope with all the requests of the Japanese companies who want to come here. And I come from Batangas, so I can be very, very objective. Southern Luzon is saturated. No more pesos can be put up there. I come from Santo Tomas, Batangas, and in my small town, there are probably 6 pesos, as Fe knows very well. Central Luzon has tremendous area for expansion, and you can absorb. Why are people moving away from Japan? You know this, those of you who are from outside. Energy has become even more expensive in Japan because of their closing down of the nuclear plants. Japanese have no more babies, no more workers. Japanese firms in China are closing down in Shenzhen, in Shanghai, in Guangzhou, also because in these Chinese cities, they've run out of workers. Some of these factories are suffering 30% to 50% attrition in their respective factories. That's why they're moving to Vietnam, the Philippines, and Indonesia. We're not alone, we're competing. But all this movement, Japan from China, will definitely be
aming bahay, mayroong isang dalagang lagi nang nag-aabang. May basket na dala at kapag siya'y nagpapaypay. Ang wika ay ganito pag may dumaraan. Ay, balot, Penoy, balot. Bigyan na kayo ng itlog na balot. Sa mga itong balot ay mahinap na tumor sa mga taong laging nalalambot. Penoy, balot. Bigyan na kayo ng itlog na balot. Sapagkat itong balot ay pampalipas ng pagod at mabisang pampalakas ng tuhod. Bili na kayo. Bibili na po. Bili na balot. Ale-ale, tindera, magkakano ang isa. 15 pesos po lamang. Kapag isa iba naman ito sila. Ay, balot, Penoy, balot. Bili na kayo ng itlog na balot. Sapagkat itong balot ay mahinang nakakot sa mga taong lagi nalalambot. Penoy, balot. Bili na kayo ng itlog na balot. Sapagkat itong balot ay pampalipas ng pagod at mabisang pampalakas ng tuhod. Penoy, balot. Penoy, balot. Penoy, balot. Penoy, balot. Penoy, balot. Sapagkat itong balot ay pampalipas ng pagod at mabisang pampalakas ng tuhod. Balot, Penoy, balot. Balot. Her eyes, the stars look like they're not shining. Her hair was perfectly without her shine. She's so beautiful, and I tell her every day. Yeah, I know, when I compliment her, she won't believe me. It's so, the things she won't see. But every time she asks me to, I look okay, I say. Kissed him all day if she didn't let me. Her laugh, she makes my life get so sexy. She's so beautiful, and I tell her every day. You know, I never ask you to stay. If there is what you're searching for, let's just stay the same. So, you rather ask me if you look okay, I'll say. When I see your face, it's not a thing that I would change. 'Cause you're amazing, just the way you are. Cause you're amazing.
Hearts unfold like flowers before me. Hear the after sun of love. Where the clouds are sailing sadness, the dark clouds die away. Never all immortal gladness fill us with light, fill us with light, oh, fill us with the light of day. Come on. Joyful, joyful Lord, we adore thee. God of glory, Lord of power. Hearts unfold like flowers before thee. Hail thee as the Son of God. Help the clouds of sin, seen in sadness. From the dark of tide away. Deliver all before the madness. You rise, loose with the light of day. Light of day.
Check the rhyme. Joyful, joyful Lord, we adore thee. And in my life I put none before thee. Since I was a youngster I came to know that he was the only way to go. So I have to go and come to an understanding. Then I'm down with the kings and now I'm demanding. Who tell me you're down with the C? So I know it is I'm down with the G.O.D. Is that with G.O.D? Hey, you know me. Is that with G.O.D? Hey, you know me. Is that with G.O.D? Hey, you know me. Is that with G.O.D?
Everybody, the mighty, mighty hearts with the morning stars begun. By the way, what have you done for him lately? Ooh, yeah. Come on, what have you done for him lately? He watches over everything, so he said, joyful, 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 oh God of glory, Lord of God. Hearts unfolding lies before heaven, Son of God, who counts of sin and sadness, and dark away. We walk before the darkness. Fill us, those with the light of day will fill us. How we need you, that's what we can fill us. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Fill us, fill us, fill us, fill us. Fill us with the light of day. Fill us with the light of day. Light of day.
Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Let us introduce ourselves again. We are students and graduates of the University of the Philippines, University of the Philippines, and we are the UP Singing Ambassadors. And we are here this afternoon, of course, to entertain you through our songs. Thank you for being so nice an audience, and thank you, Mr. Dennis Wright. Thank you to Peregrine Capital, and Green. And thank you to Global Gateway Logistics City for inviting us again here. Our pleasure and our honor. And I'd just like to share with you that we're very thankful, and this is our only way to say thank you in gratitude to Mr. Dennis Wright and all the people, the vice presidents, all the officers, and Jean and all the staff for taking care of us always and in our endeavors to always represent the Philippines in international competitions. Just for your information, we just arrived last year for two competitions, very important competitions in Europe, in Hungary and Arezzo, and we garnered two first prizes, and I got the best conductor award in Hungary, and thank you. And just for your information, Arezzo competitions in Italy is one of the top 6 competitions in the world, and all the grand prizes that grand prize winners in the 6 competitions, they vie for the European Grand Prix the following year. In 2001, we won the grand prize in Arezzo, the first ever to garner it in a qual from Asia, and also to share, Guido de Arezzo in Italy is the most prestigious of the top 6 competitions. Thank you. We give you our entertainment songs, and hopefully we see you in one of our forthcoming concerts to see us sing our competition songs. Definitely not for a lunch like this. And again, we'd like to give you our last song, our thank you, our prayer, Godspeed, and God to always take care of us, our businesses, our endeavors, our family. We'd like to sing you Till We Meet Again, an Irish blessing.
May the road rise to meet you. May the wind be always at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your face. The rains fall soft upon your feet. And until we meet again, until we meet again, may God hold you in the palm of His hand. And until we meet again, until we meet again, may God hold you in the palm of His until we meet again, until we meet again, may God hold you in the palm of His hand. And until we meet again, until we meet again, may God hold you in the palm of His hand.
Once again, ladies and gentlemen, for the University of Philippines Singing Ambassadors and their conductor, what a fantastic lunchtime entertainment. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. That was wonderful. Okay, we'll get reset up for the afternoon session. We've probably got about 15 or 20 minutes before we get restarted. A couple of things I'd like you to encourage you to do in that time. First of all, obviously, use the restroom facilities as you may need to, but we've got a whole host of supporters and sponsors outside with their promotional booths. Many of them have free giveaways, I'm told. Out there we have AirAsia, PTT, DB Schenker, Subic Bay International Terminal Corporation, Port Calls, Clark Development Corporation, Island Clove, Clark Field Aviation Services International, Land Bank, and right outside this door here, the National Bookstore. The National Bookstore has with them today many, many copies, probably not enough copies, but they have many of what we're going to hear about after lunch. This is the book about the Aerotropolis, and the co-author is going to be our speaker after lunch. So we're going to learn all about this concept after lunch. It's been referred to during this morning. Greg is here this afternoon for the whole show. You buy a book here today, he'll do a signing of it for you. Okay, so please visit the sponsor booths. Be back in here about 20 minutes, and we've got the presentation that will blow your socks off. Okay, see you in about 20 minutes. To the afternoon session of our Clark Aviation Conference 2013, put on for you by Clark International Airport Group and Global Gateway Logistics City. We had a fantastic morning program looking at some of the macro factors that we need to consider as we move forward with the developments of Clark as an aviation centre and all the supporting and peripheral industries, community activities that go into supporting and developing that. We had a rather lively panel, predominantly public sector representatives, but also including a non-government distinguished professor. And then we've had the lunch and the wonderful entertainment from the University of Philippines Singing Ambassadors. This afternoon we've got a post-lunch keynote for you. We're then going to have a look at Philippine aviation in a global context. We're going to then have the results of the survey of what the private sector are looking for from Clark as an aviation hub. And then we'll wrap it up with a private sector panel discussing similar topics but coming from a private sector view about the future for Clark as an aviation hub. So I'd invite you to all settle down so that I can introduce our post-lunch keynote speaker. Thank you. We're very privileged to have with us a global traveller who is a journalist, urbanist and speaker. He's a contributing writer for Fast Company and an author of the international best-selling book, Aerotropolis, The Way We Will Live Next. It has a beautiful, very colourful cover on it, but I can guarantee the content is very substantial, very enlightening, and very futurist. Greg Lindsay is our guest. He speaks frequently about globalization, innovation, and the future of cities. And you'll see in your program, he's recently spoken at some very eminent institutions, including the London School of Economics, Institute for the Future, Intel Labs, Museum of Modern Art, the World Policy Institute, Asia Society, Columbia University, and the first Clark Aviation Conference. He's an expert on the future of travel, technology, and urbanism. Please join me in welcoming Greg Lindsay.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you all for coming. I hope you're enjoying the conference so far. You've heard, the name of this conference is Clark, Asia's next Aerotropolis. Well, we haven't discussed what an Aerotropolis is or the Aerotropolises that do exist. And so would you mind lowering the lights, please, by the way? It'll help see the slides. And so I'm here to basically speak to you and describe what the Aerotropolis is and put it into context, this incredible revolution in aviation that's happening worldwide, and why basically the cities of tomorrow, at least some of them, and some of the most important ones, will be built in relation to their airports. This quote by former President Lee Myung-bak of South Korea: "If the 20th century was the era of nations, then the 21st century belongs to cities." This has been formulated many times in many ways, but the notion of it is that the 20th century belonged to the nation state, the Cold War, empires battling out and being dismantled into smaller nations, the realm of warfare and politics, which we're still seeing the legacy of going on right now in the South China Sea. But the real future belongs to cities. The city is the element. It's the place where innovation happens. It's the place where growth happens. It's where jobs are created. It's where we live our lives. And increasingly, it is where...
Is there a difference? He said, no, the only difference is we remove the IBM seal and we just put Acer. That's the only difference between IBM computer and us. So my dream is that as Clark becomes a logistics hub, there will be some bright people among you who will start noticing that parts are coming, the cheapest part are coming, and then we'll assemble something and do something about it. It's not far-fetched. Do you know that the Aboitiz company, how it started? It was started 150 years ago by somebody who was running several ships. He was running what they call transit, wherein you transport commodities from one island in the Visayas. And of course, the hub at that time, there were no airplanes. The hub at that time, of course, was in Cebu. So he would have a fleet of vessels who would be going to Samar, to Bohol, and so forth. Okay, what distinguished him was that every time the captain would go to home port, he would be interviewed by the owner. And the owner, I forgot the first name, but Mr. Aboitiz would ask, "Oh, what is the price of rice here? What is the price of sugar? What are you bringing to this area?" and so forth. Because he realized that what is more important than the cargo that is being carried is the information that is embedded into this operation. And how did he make his money? He found out that there's a price differential of sugar, let's say in Samar versus sugar in Negros, and all he had to do that. And there were even times, because what he did was that he had the boats. If the boats were not full with the cargo of others, that is when he loaded his own sugar to be traded. And therefore, his transportation cost, as economists will tell you, is really zero because of the empty bulkhead. So that's what I'm saying is the role of the airport, of aviation to the world. That we hope that there is somebody from among these who will be the future Aboitiz, looking at the information that is embedded in the logistics that we are carrying, that he will start making sense of what is going on. So these are the dreams that I would like to have. Unfortunately, I'm too old to carry those dreams. That's why I'm looking at the young people out there in order to be able to carry on these dreams. You are going to live in a far, far better world than us. And the only thing that we want to say is that we wish you the best of luck. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Victor. And I'm sure you've got many, many, many years yet to live out some of these dreams. So thanks for sharing those insights and some key indicators there, I think, of potential sectors for Clark to focus on in terms of development. One was the hubbing of highly skilled professionals. Another one was engineering services and related expertise. Agriculture was another one. And as a regional logistics hub and indeed a gateway into Southeast Asia from the North American continent. So thank you very much for sharing your vast experience and your insights and your memories and dreams with us. Thank you very much. Next, we're going to have a look at the private sector. First of all, we're going to have the results of a survey that was done amongst the private sector to distill the private sector's wish list of what they would like to see from and for Clark Airport. And following on from that, we're going to have a panel discussion similar to the format that we had this morning, except the panel discussion this afternoon will be private sector representation. So prior to that, and indeed to set the scene for the panel discussion, we're going to have Jeff Pradhan, my good friend. He's the Sales and Marketing Vice President for Peregrine Development International, who are the developers of the Global Gateway Logistics City. Fantastic whole park there. And of course, the co-organizer of today's event. Jeff's also previously served as the president of the Clark Investors and Locators Association. He's got many years of professional experience, specifically in defense contracting, and as you can see from your program, he was responsible for providing some contracting plan management to support the Defense Logistics Agency on worldwide missions for energy resources to the military. Very interesting as well, Jeff also worked with the Office of the President of the General Assembly of United Nations in New York, where he was doing extensive research for the Office of the President, including looking at research papers on the rule of law, international trade and development, and United Nations reform. So to talk us through the private sector wish list for Clark, please welcome from Peregrine Development International Vice President Jeff Pradhan. Jeff.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this first of what we hope will be a yearly event for Clark, for aviation, and for basically the Philippines in general. What I'm going to share with you guys right now is a survey that went out in advance of the conference to kind of find out tap the pulse of the private sector, get a feeling from some of the stakeholders within the local area, within the region, within the country, of what they see in terms of Clark, Philippine aviation, and the role of Clark within the Philippines' broader aviation. So that's what I'll be going through. I want to share with you guys first some of the questions that we went out to the respondents with. And the questions we went out with was to develop Clark International Airport into a viable passenger logistics hub, what action points must the government implement? What contributions can private sector entities like eco-zone locators, airline operators, and logistics companies provide? What role should the private sector play in the development of Clark? What role should the Philippine government play in the development of Clark? And what role should Clark play in the Philippines' overall aviation infrastructure? So some of these I've combined because the variety of responses were quite extensive. So I've tried to condense some of that and to make it more palatable for you guys to see here now. So the respondents that these questions went out to, and some of the feedback came back from the aviation industry in terms of carriers, manufacturing sector, real estate developers, transportation logistics operators, tourism and hospitality industry, NGOs, and public sector, just regular public citizens. So instead of just providing you this feedback, I wanted to also throw in some perspective, which I think helps to understand some of the feedback that was provided. So the government's role in developing the Philippine aviation infrastructure, I have the logos here of the various agencies. You know, Faye and other presenters have talked about the collaborative effort that takes place in the national government's scale to address Philippine aviation infrastructure, Clark among that, tourism promotion, and all of that. So it's not one specific agency. DOTC is certainly maybe at the forefront, but you would say BCDA is right there, DOT is right there, BOI is right there, and it's all a very collaborative effort in terms of promoting the Philippines through that connectivity that you get from your aviation infrastructure. So the Philippine government proclamations, this is one of the things I wanted to go through, and what I'm going to kind of go through is directly related to the feedback that came back from the respondents. So over the last 15, 20 years, there's been a variety of proclamations from the government. I have a timeline here that kind of jumps around, but you can see it's gone all over the place. From Clark, basically the turnover transition from a military installation to a Freeport zone. The first proclamation from President Ramos saying, you know what, Clark's going to be the next international gateway. It's going to eventually supplant and support and complement NAIA. But since then, 2003, you've had talks of the North Rail project. Where is that going? When is that going to happen? Start, stop. You've had 2004, some expansions, improvements done at Clark in terms of infrastructure. 2007, you've had this concept of floating the idea of a twin airport concept to support Luzon and Philippine aviation infrastructure. But recently now you've had in 2010, as recently as 2010, you've had NAIA being said to be sold, outright sold, and then that money utilized to then develop Clark. So a complete 180 change from the twin airport concept. Recently again, you've had Clark cannot be developed until you have a high-speed rail link. And now most recently you've had, no, we're going to do something in Bulacan by San Miguel or some other conglomerate. So all of this is kind of detracted from any kind of logical, coherent effort that has been sustained. And what that's caused from the private sector perspective is uncertainty. And as anybody from the private sector can tell you, uncertainty leads to less investment and lost opportunities. So again, another aspect is death by study. So beyond the proclamations, you've had starting, and not even starting in 2008, Ben probably is the best person to talk on this, but he gave us some of this perspective this morning. Maybe a decade ago, starting with President Ramos' proclamation, we're going to utilize Clark and take advantage of that infrastructure and that asset that's there. We've had study after study leading up to these last ones, with JICA coming out and saying of the alternatives to NAIA, which one is the best, and clearly stated Clark was the only viable option. But yet you still have another study being done, or another proclamation being done in contrast. So this kind of confusion has hurt basically the environment for investment, and from a private sector perspective, has made it difficult to really get behind Clark. And actually, let me go back. This is a nice quote out of the Philippines Times. This was in an op-ed piece. The Philippine risks wasting time and resources that it does not have by not developing Clark and by doing these further studies. Instead of, it's not necessarily developing Clark, just support the organic development that's taking place already. So in addition, everybody's familiar with the Category 2 status. This again has been something of a hindrance and something that's certainly on the radar for the private sector. A variety of industries, obviously the tourism sector, obviously the airline carriers who'd like to and provide that long haul to the North American market. But it's not just the North American market that this has affected. We're talking about Japan following suit. We're talking about the EU following suit. There's several nations that have followed what the FAA downgrade and banning of additional flights from the Philippines. They've followed that, and that's hurt the lost tourism and economic opportunities for the Philippines. So this started in 2008. Just right now, the most recent update is that they are doing an audit this week. Now, everybody's very hopeful that that's going to go through and finally lift Category 2 status, but we'll wait and see. But the reality is that is certainly a significant aspect to really becoming an Aerotropolis, to be increasing the connectivity. Another aspect that's definitely on the radar from the private sector perspective is the common carrier tax. Now, this one's certainly being addressed, and it's great to see by the Congress recently passing in December 2012 Senate approval, Senate Bill 3343, that's removing the common carrier tax, repealing it. But we've already seen the damage that's happened from this common carriers tax, and that is foreign airlines have ceased operations in Manila, specifically citing the CCT. And to give you an example, there's British Airways, Lufthansa, Alitalia. Swiss International Airlines, and the most recent KLM was the final one. So right now, out of the Philippines, there is literally no direct connectivity to Europe. That's very, very significant when Greg talks about the connectivity and what that does for an economy. The fact that one flight to Japan can bring in 10 million square meters of Japanese investment, or $123 million in one flight in 1 year. So the fact that we don't have direct access to the European market is very, very significant, not only for the Philippines, but certainly for Clark. So I wanted to also give a case study, because this is another point. Again, I'm generalizing. I'm trying to synthesize and package some of the responses that we received to be able to present it to you more coherently today. So I'm using Cebu Pacific as a case study for this. If you look at Cebu Pacific in terms of the liberalization of the air market, in terms of the pocket open skies and the success, the last speaker mentioned this. Other speakers have mentioned this. This has been tremendous. Basically, the best example is the low-cost carrier explosion that's taking place around the country. But just microcosm of that, look at Cebu Pacific. It used to be a monopoly. It used to be PAL that had sole access to air connectivity and in and out of the country, and that really did not improve growth. That did not improve connectivity. Very few examples of monopolies do. So PAL, in every attempt, would try to stifle, thwart any new entries, increase the barrier requirement for new companies to come in and operate. Cebu Pacific is one of these companies that was able to do so maybe 10 years ago. Very small, came into the market, found a niche within the low-cost carrier market, not necessarily competing directly with PAL in terms of full service, but doing that low-cost niche. So they came in, and just some of the most recent, Cebu Pacific actually just recently bought over very aggressive expansion they're going through right now, about 100 planes that they've just put on order to buy. And this is their future growth. So they're betting big on aviation infrastructure increases. They're betting big on what other presenters have talked about, this growth in just service operations. Very few of the overall Filipino market have flown. There's so many first-time flyers. That's a significant market that's just now starting to be tapped, not only here in the Philippines, but all the places that, say, Cebu Pacific, AirAsia, and others fly to. They're tapping into this first-time flyer market, and you see it in their campaign slogans, everyone can fly and everything else. But if you look at what they're doing, Cebu Pacific now has outstripped PAL. In a decade, they went from nothing to more market share of domestic market than PAL. It's unbelievably significant, and it goes to show the benefits in the entire country of air liberalization. And that's a significant factor not only for Clark, where you now have this low-cost carrier explosion, and there's actually more low-cost carriers in Clark than there is in Manila, than there is anywhere else in the Philippines. So this is certainly something to continue to tap into. And with AirAsia hubbing at Clark versus any other location, that's another significant sign of this and tapping into this. They certainly see it. So the private sector wish list then of all these points that I've kind of drawn into in these examples is the private sector would like a clear, and this is on the Philippine aviation infrastructure at macro level, a clear and enumerated plan for the country's aviation infrastructure, a timeline for implementation of this plan, an execution of the plan, achieve Category 1 status, repeal the common carriers tax, and increase liberalization and competition in the environment, in the Philippine aviation environment. Now, going into the private sector role, as I went through those questions in the beginning, where does the private sector fit in? So what contributions can they make, and what role should they have in the development of Clark? And if you look at it, I kind of broke it down first to just show who the stakeholders are in this environment. So some of these you certainly would be familiar with. Common sense makes sense that airline carriers are certainly a stakeholder. MRO, maintenance, repair, overhaul facilities are stakeholders. Aviation training, manufacturers, real estate developers, cargo logistics, and also tourism stakeholders. So you have a broad range of stakeholders from the private sector who all need to certainly work with the DOTC and the BOI and these other government sector groups. And what I wanted to do was kind of show you the role that the private sector is already playing. I would say the private sector is fulfilling the role that has been asked of them. The respondents that have come back have certainly said there's certain improvement in synergy in working with the government and working among the stakeholders to increase the benefits that Clark can offer, increase the benefits of what tourism packages can be offered in Clark, medical tourism. But I would tell you, if you look through these next couple slides that I'm going to present, the private sector is already leading the way in this effort, and they've done a phenomenal job to date, and I think that's only continuing. So on the airline side, again, going back to the low-cost carrier environment here, very significant. Clark is the #1 low-cost carrier hub and airport for the Philippines, and you've seen the growth that's taking place. Other panelists and speakers have mentioned this. 1.3 million passengers last year, maybe not so significant in the larger scale of things, but what is significant is in the next 3 years, you're talking about very close to 10 million passengers being here at Clark. So one of the fastest growing airports in the world, both on the international side and the domestic side now, and certainly this goes into what you'll see here, I'll show you in a little bit with Emirates. But tremendous growth that has to be kept up with, really, at this point. The MRO facilities I mentioned, you're already seeing investment. This is Singapore Airlines Engineering has committed a $100 million investment for 5 MRO facilities, maintenance, repair, overhaul facilities. This, again, is a Cebu Pacific joint venture with Singapore Airlines and Cebu Pacific. They already have their first hangar up that's been servicing A320s for about 2 years plus. They currently are building right across from that hangar another A320 hangar. I met with Rene Bengzon, who will be joining the private sector panel here after me, and he's shared the plans for Singapore Airlines. In the next month or two, they'll be breaking ground on the wide-body hangar, and then before the end of the year, they'll be breaking ground on the A380 hangar. And they have space there for a total of 6 hangars. So very significant what they're doing. In addition to Singapore Airlines, I don't have the graphic here, but there's Metrojet. Metrojet is out of Hong Kong, and they're servicing basically the Lear jets, the corporate jets, which have really no option in Hong Kong anymore because there's no room. No options in many Chinese aviation centers because of room, and no options in Singapore. So now Clark is becoming a destination of choice for Lear jets, for corporate jets, maintenance, repair, and just the stationing of them here. Flight simulation, Arby was one of the provided a question earlier, but another joint venture, Cebu Pacific and Canadian Aerospace Engineering, they put up a $50 million facility, full motion simulators for A320s. Open, they've got their first 2 simulators in operation today. I was able to see that facility as well. Very, very impressive. Completely high tech, and that's just the first part of it. They're going to have another 2 simulators going in there, potentially even wide body aircraft, A330 planes being provided in terms of simulation. And this is meant to be a regional simulation training center, not just for Cebu Pacific, but for the region. So this brings in that connectivity, that brings in that hub that Greg talked about. The hubs are getting hubbier. These are the types of activities that the private sector is already bringing to the table to really promote and make Clark more of a destination. On the manufacturing side, there's Jamco, and there's several others beyond this in many of these categories, but I'm just giving you kind of a sampling. Jamco has come in and they're doing aviation plane interiors. They basically are building the kitchen areas, the cabinetry, the areas where the stewardesses and stewards operate. And they're doing this for both Boeing aircraft and Airbus aircraft. Very significant that they've decided to choose Clark. And what's significant about this is that when one comes in, many others follow it. It always happens that way. Just like Emirates. You're not going to see Emirates come in by themselves. Emirates has a whole ecosystem of other groups that follow their moves. They don't do their own route planning. They don't really follow anything except, oh, Emirates is going? Okay, we'll be right behind them. Same thing with these manufacturers. It becomes easier for them to operate in terms of logistics, in terms of manpower, in terms of education resources when they all come into an area. So I mentioned this logistics side. I'm not on the government sector, so I can kind of hint maybe a little bit more than some others that one of these 2 major players who was here before and still operates here is very close to coming back to Clark and very close to coming back to the Philippines because they left recently and have found it difficult to operate in China, as many other companies have, and have now decided, you know what, it's probably time that we look at coming back to Clark for our operations. But currently, right now, you still have 13 flights per week, technical stops, being done by UPS and FedEx through Taipei into China, where the main volume is. But that's still happening at Clark. But what you're going to see is an increase in this, especially with Emirates. Emirates wide-body aircraft is going to provide, I can't remember the figures, but an enormous amount of cargo space that can now reach Dubai and pretty much anywhere in the world from there. So that's going to provide an opportunity for Texas Instruments, Samsung, and many other locators who are here right now and unfortunately still shipping out of Manila because they don't have the ability to ship out air freight through the narrow-body aircraft to now do it at Clark. So that's going to only improve what you're seeing logistics-wise from Clark. Real estate developers, you have GGLC, you have Berta Phil, you have Phil Excel, you have Dong Wong. You have a variety of groups who are here providing commercial space, office space, BPO space, logistics space, manufacturing space. And this is certainly something that's necessary. And really the key factor for this is the planning. Land use planning within the airport complex is very important, and land use planning outside of the airport complex is very important, as Greg and others have alluded to. And so you already have players in this sector who are anticipating this airport's growth, anticipating the businesses that are going to be coming in because of the connectivity provided by the airport, and are catering to that. So talking about the Philippine aviation and Clark and the role that it will play in the Philippine infrastructure, here's some of the connectivity that already exists today in the region. Clark already has more international flights and passenger volume than Cebu. Cebu is a domestic hub. It's always had more domestic passenger volume than Clark. But Clark, for whatever reason, the way it developed, has always been kind of a regional international hub, and especially for the low-cost carriers. Now what you're seeing, beyond the international connectivity, is the domestic connectivity. This has happened just recently within, I'd say, the last maybe year and a half, 2 years, but certainly with Cebu Pacific, AirAsia, Airphil Express, these guys are now being able to link you from Clark to Puerto Princesa, Calibo, which is Boracay, Cebu, Davao, and soon to be many others. But what this has done, straight out of the mouth of the Emirates Vice President for Route Planning, is this has provided basically the loop within the Philippines that can pick up all the potential OFWs and other travelers who can then board that wide-body aircraft from Clark and now go over to the Middle East. Obviously, the OFW population there is significant, around 3 million OFWs, a majority of them coming from Central and Northern Luzon. So those can reach Clark without any problem. But even the ones in the other parts of the country now have the connectivity to get to Clark and get to the GCC countries now. So in addition to that, what else is being seen in terms of the connectivity that's being provided by Clark? This is something that SEAC has shown, and this is tremendous. Again, all very recent, but Dragon Air, a subsidiary of Cathay Pacific, which you can check in at Clark and check through to any other destination in Dragon Air in their entire network around the world with your baggage and your ticketing, so you don't have to go back in and customs and immigration. You check through at Clark and you can get to anywhere in the world that Cathay Pacific services through Hong Kong. AirAsia, this is great. I didn't find this graphic until I looked at the souvenir program that they just updated this. I actually have done this. I went to Bali through Clark, checked through baggage. Phenomenal. Completely efficient, stress-free, and just a wonderful experience to not have to go through immigration and not have to redo these processes. AirAsia's connectivity through Kuala Lumpur is unreal in Asia. And so basically now you're seeing four destinations in Australia being serviced, 3 in Indonesia, and then the rest of the region being serviced, all through AirAsia with its hub at Clark and its main hub in the region at KL. So Emirates obviously being the major, most recent announcement, starting flights in October 1. And what is that going to mean for Clark? Well, let's put it in perspective. Emirates, one of the largest airlines in the world. We're talking about destinations, 22 in Africa, 31 in Asia, 34 in Australasia, 32 in Europe, 11 in Americas, and 17 in the Middle East. So 147 global destinations you can now reach through Clark. That's a game changer, fundamental game changer. Greg mentioned it. Why does he believe in Clark? Why was he willing to come and speak? Because if Tony Fernandez and Tim Clark, 2 of the smartest guys, most aggressive guys in the aviation industry today, are putting their bets on Clark, that's something to be said right there.
So that happened, and we're quite gung-ho and very excited to see the developments along this front. A few more things would be like, I think the real advantage that Clark has is like we could cater globally because of all of the reasons that has already been presented by the panel members here. We are in a very unique, advantageous position, and we should actually do it, not tomorrow, but I think this is the right time to actually do that perfect choice. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Charlie. Thank you. Okay, let me come to Scotty next and ask you to share more about your air ambulance offering and your opening comments with us. Scotty, please.
Thank you. When I first started coming up to Clark, probably 7 or 8 years ago, I'd already fulfilled one of my dreams, and Dr. Victor reminded me this afternoon that I've already filled my second one, being in Subic and starting up the Philippines' first international 24/7 air ambulance. Also, when I first came here, I thought, what a waste of buildings and ground. About 6 weeks ago, I noticed that the conference was going to be held, so I got in touch with the secretary, who invited me over to a meeting, and here I am now on a panel. And I'm not based in Clark, I'm not based in Pampanga, I'm based at Subic. But I bring greetings from Subic, and especially from the Aviation Concepts who employ me. We fully support all the moves that you're making. I think the committee, you're doing a wonderful job, Jeff, under your chairmanship, and huge steps are being made towards what you're all talking about today. It's wonderful being part of that. Part of our philosophy at Subic is that, for your information, we run currently, we're managing 14 corporate aircraft out of Subic Bay, and we've got another 7 in the pipeline, which we hope will be online before Christmas. That's an exciting project for us, and we're employing highly skilled people, mainly Filipino people, and this has been one of our major aims, is even though we're an American company and I'm a New Zealander, we will promote the Philippines and the Philippine people. Since we started up the air ambulance, somebody summed this up very well today, I think it was Greg, that the medical service bringing skilled doctors back from overseas to the Philippines here, and this is one of our philosophies as well. We hope to, once I've read your book, I might get some more clues out of it, but we hope to continue this, bringing Philippine doctors and nurses back from overseas so they can actually live at home, earn money at home, and spread the money around the families, is what we're all trying to do. The air ambulance we operate out of Subic covers the whole of Asia, and we also provide, we have 130 staff in Makati doing logistics, mainly for Jetstar. We also run a worldwide medical escort service, and we've been bringing Filipinos back from around the world on commercial airlines. It's exciting with the startup of AirAsia, expanding the wings in Emirates and Dragonair, that we now will start tapping into Asian airlines to bring Asian people back here. The cruise lines of the world employ, I understand, 40% of the crews are Filipinos, and that's a heck of a lot of people around the world. We've already brought people back from Copenhagen, from London, and with the tie-up that we have with the hospital at Subic, which is going ahead in leaps and bounds, we offer another service that it's a hassle-free, landing at Subic and going 15 minutes to the hospital, or landing at Clark and going 30 minutes with the red light going, instead of facing the ever-growing traffic congestion in Manila. We also have bases in Guam, because we're a Guam registered company, and we've just recently opened in Tokyo. Basically, that's about it for me. the saturation of Hong Kong and the likes of the starting up in China, the expanding commercial, non-commercial flights there has made one of the reasons why we decided to expand to Subic. And we understand that there are 40 new aviation business private companies forming in China in the next few years. Hopefully we will attract them over to Subic/Clark to carry out their maintenance, etc. One thing came through after the lunch is that some of the previous speakers I spoke to said we must promote Clark Subic as a one item rather than fragmented, and we fully support that. Thank you for the opportunity, and I look forward to the rest of the conference.
Thank you, Scotty. Thank you. Okay, well, well done for establishing this very critical service for air ambulance, and thank you for joining our panel. And I'll come back later to this point about the Subic and Clark being one as opposed to two. And have you got a microphone, Dennis? Let's ask Dennis for his opening comments from Peregrine International Development, please.
Thanks, Mark. I've been studying the country since 1972 when I first landed here, and have been very much part of being up close and personal and seeing it change. What brought us here in 2005, and again, we started the due diligence on our project in 2005, long before anybody really could spell Clark. And if you go back to 2005, the SC-TEX hadn't been really started. It had been discussed. There really was no locators here at Clark. Lewin Tai certainly was here. But the major Japanese industrial park was here. But the explosive growth, nobody had even seen it. Nobody could even envision it coming. It was my personal belief at the time, by looking at demographics and at world events, that led me to believe that there was an opportunity to create a logistics hub at Clark. And originally our focus was Subic, but eventually became convinced that Clark was it because of the airport. And a lot of the things that Greg had talked about, and that's articulated in the book on Aerotropolises and the impact of aviation and airports on world economies. But when you had that in your mind, and you have that in your being, and you believe that airports is critical to the future, and I don't think anybody could have articulated that better than what Greg did earlier. But if you really believe that, and then you looked at what was going around with globalization, higher cost of wages in manufacturing in the West, and in order to be competitive in a global market, you had to reduce costs, and the only way you can reduce costs is really through outsourcing or bringing in cheap labor into where you're at. At the same time, China was emerging, and the Philippines is sitting here on the doorsteps of China. It had an abundant, low-cost workforce. But more importantly, it spoke one of the world's standard languages, the language of aviation, the FAA, the language of maritime shipping, the language of Microsoft. And then you look back at history and you recognize that the Philippines was sitting at the crossroads of the Pacific, literally. It sits on the northbound interstate commerce, in this particular case, not highway or railroad, but a shipping lane between the industrialized nations of Japan and Korea in the north, the entire eastern seaboard of China down through to Singapore, and the Philippines is exactly halfway in the middle. It's also on the east-west route because of all the traffic coming through the Straits of Malacca, and generally continues either south through the San Bernardino Straits or through the Surigao Straits. And so the Philippines, this isn't nothing new. The Spaniards figured that out. Greg talked about that. The Chinese figured that out. The Americans had their two largest strategic bases in the Pacific here. All you had to do was put those pieces together and realize there was no alternative. And then when you factored that in with the growth of domestic air and where are all those people going to fly to because they all have relatives in Manila, you recognize there was really only one viable alternative, and that was Clark. And since then, for somebody who was trying to get people to commit to investing and taking on a $3 billion liability, not a 3 billion peso liability, but a $3 billion liability, you have to be pretty sure about what you're saying. And to sit there and convince somebody to put your money where your mouth is and to put it here. And so, yes, there was not a single banker, not a single attorney, not a single businessman, not the world's leading real estate experts, not CBRE, Jones Lang LaSalle, or Colliers, not a single entity in 2005 or 2006 or 2007 or 2008, not one of those experts from any of those industries believed in Clark. I fought hard to get an investor to take a trip here, spend the time to understand what was going on, and I feel definitely very much vindicated by after we made that decision to have watched Texas Instruments, Samsung, Yokohama's expansion, all of the other locators that have come in here, to see AirAsia put a hub here, to now see Emirates come here, is a vindication of something that no one really believed in the early years. Now, as refreshing as that is, most people today can somewhat see it. But we still have too many people in Imperial Manila who don't see it. And so, one, I compliment Jeff for conceptualizing this conference, getting the support of the people who sponsored and co-organized this event, because it's through education and information. And if there was one slide that you should have paid attention to that Greg had up there, illiteracy is not from the lack of education, but illiteracy is coming from the lack of the ability to learn, unlearn, and relearn. And we have too many people who fit that category that haven't realized that they need to unlearn what they think had been happening and relearn that Clark is happening and get the public sector behind what the private sector has put their money where their mouth is, and now let the public sector recognize that the private sector got it right and get in the parade and help make it happen at a higher, faster, more accelerated rate.
Okay, thanks very much, Dennis. Thank you. All right, we've had the opening comments from our 6 panelists. We're open for discussion and your feedback, your questions, or your comments that you have for our private sector panel. No questions as yet. I'll pursue on with this first one. So, Angelito, I want to bring you in first here. Based on what we just heard from Dennis rounding up the opening comments there, how can your organization help? Did you call it Imperial Manila? Yes. All right, okay. So how can obviously an independent and neutral organization, how can you help the private sector deal with the what do you call them? Are they mandarins in Imperial Manila? How can you bring an independent sector voice to address some of these problems that Dennis articulated? And I think I saw a few nodding heads when he was talking about it as well. Share with us.
Actually, here in Clark, we have also the Chamber of Commerce here, the Clark Chamber of Commerce, and we have Subic Chamber of Commerce.
Okay.
So we will talk to them. And actually, the one that I discussed earlier about the Subic problem, when I was one also of the speaker at the Subic Bay Maritime authority,
Yeah.
it was already addressed, and I think it was resolved. So it's more of talking to the local chamber here.
Okay.
Because for your information, PCCI is represented all over the country. We have 135 local chambers
Okay.
in the country.
All right.
So I'll make sure to get in touch with the president of the local chamber here.
Okay, so we have a local chamber here
Yes,
in Clark,
yes.
and a separate one in Subic.
Yes, separate one. Then we have also Pampanga Chamber of Commerce and Industry too.
Okay, many
And
chambers
we have
of commerce.
also Metro Manila, Metro Angeles Chamber of Commerce and Industry.
Okay. All right, so the Chamber of Commerce is one avenue, and that would, the local ones would reach into your national organization to help get these issues through in Manila.
Well, it's not actually reaching, but they are represented by their vice president for North Luzon.
Okay.
Which is attending our board meetings every month.
All right. Okay, good. Let me ask, Charlie, you mentioned about supply chain excellence and the Philippines being the capital of the world for procurement and supply chain. We heard earlier today some comments about building centers of excellence for educational institutions and bringing in students to come into Clark specifically, or the surrounding area of Clark. How would that map into some of the capabilities that you are talking about development in terms of global supply chain excellence?
That's a very good, look at it. We're approaching different organizations or companies to actually embrace, the concept that supply chains makes a significant difference, for sustainability, managing risk, and being competitive. In addition to just working closely with companies, the companies are always telling us that where do we get this talent? And we see a great fit between the institute, like the Procurement and Supply Institute of Asia, which is the affiliate of ISM, which is the Institute for Supply Management in the US, to actually get to draw much more closer with the academic sector over here. As you know, in our schools, most of you probably are graduates of business or commerce, or even medicine. But when it comes to procurement, operations management, or supply chain, you never get that course in your lifetime. You learn it as you move ahead with your with your jobs, right? I learned something from Dennis in one of the presentation of Dennis here. Sabi niya, hindi pwede ang pwede na. And it actually struck me, that if we want to become a country that's highly competitive, look at Singapore. Singapore, why is Singapore so efficient? Because they practice good supply chain management concepts, They don't talk about it, they really practice it. And going back to the questions, like, there has to be a strong partnership, not only with the business entities here, but also with the academe. And education can be face-to-face, but another thing that we're putting up, education can also become virtual. Even at this age, I'm still undertaking a PhD that is virtual in supply chain. I mean to say, you get that. There's a lot of tools available, like e-learning, e-books, e-videos, and there's a great potential. If you want companies here to be competitive, I think there's enough justification that companies has to really embrace good supply chain management concept. And organizations like BPO, KPO's organizations has to be made available over here, because you can always teach them, but if you don't assist them, it's very hard to actually evolve. So you really have to get people over here and make an investment that you're going to be around to actually enable them to make it actually happen. Thank you.
Thanks, Charlie. Renee, you mentioned a couple of things on the talent aspect. So there's a potential opportunity, Clark, to have incoming inbound students make education for foreign students one of the business sectors here. Of course, the corollary to that is what you said, is that when you set up here, you found that the local supply of labor was eminently trainable, and when these people went to Singapore, they were like the star performers among the work team. Tell us a little bit more about that, because you sounded that what you'd got out of the local manpower was better, even better than what you'd expected. Yeah.
As I mentioned, the supply of manpower here is really abundant. There's There's not that many schools that are doing the aviation programs that we need. But we're getting them from all over the Philippines, not only in Pampanga. As much as possible, we need to get it from Pampanga because they tend to stay if they're from the region. But we also go to Manila, we go to Cebu, and we get them here. We train them for 1 year, and they become highly skilled mechanics that, in fact, they rise very fast in our ranks. We have some trainees that are now third-level mechanics already. If they had gone to Singapore and stayed there, by this time they would have been just technicians. But here they're called Mechanic Ace, which is one of the highest levels already. And that's just a period of the last 3.5 years that we've been operating. So we always encourage them. I know that the students, they come into school, they take an aviation course with the mindset that they will be working abroad. So we encourage them, look at a career in the Philippines, because here you have the potential to have a fulfilling career if you stay. You go abroad, you stay at a certain level, you come back here, you're left behind. So it's quite it's remarkable actually. We're so happy about that.
All right, very
May I
pleased
chime
to-
in?
Yes, please, man. Yeah.
I'm using my female card here and butting in. No, but I just wanted to affirm exactly what you said. In AirAsia Philippines, a full 66% of our bus, we're about 213 employees now, come from Northern and Central Luzon. And of the 66%, more than half of that, or a full 36% of the total, come from Pampanga. So there's a wealth of very well-educated, talented people, and particularly in the aviation industry, you need people with the right attitude. You need people who are hospitable, who genuinely enjoy talking to people. And our cabin crew, for instance, are very much in demand. We typically have to train and recruit and train our cabin crew and our flight deck ahead of getting our aircraft. And the one advantage we have being allied with AirAsia is that there are 5 other companies that would be willing to take our crew while we're waiting for our aircraft to come. So I believe that the Filipino cabin crew are among the most sought after in the AirAsia group. So we're really proud of that, because with each aircraft we'll be adding about 80 more people, and we are contributing to Northern Central Luzon and to Pampanga, and we don't have to go very far.
Very good. Does that lead on, let me have a follow-on question then, does that lead on that if your Filipino staff are sought after within the AirAsia group, does that therefore lead to the fact that they're sought after by the other budget airlines as well?
Oh yes, they are.
So coming into, when you've got the star performers, your competitors want to, so tell us a bit about what you do for retention. Once you've got these great people and their staff, what do you do about staff retention to prevent them going to some of the other budget carriers?
Well, first of all, we pay very competitive wages. I think if you compare us to the local airlines, we pay very, very good wages. But also our people policy is very enlightened. We have a very flat organization. It's an open, you come to our office here in Clark, and it's a former warehouse that we gutted down. It's an open space. I don't even have my own private office. I'm in one corner. I have, of course, the largest space because everybody always comes for meetings over on my desk. But it's totally wide open. We encourage people to, speak out. We try to take care of their benefits as well. We look after their well-being, because if you're going to be, we believe that if you take care of your people and you treat them well, they will treat your customers well, and you can tell the difference. So far, I think, knock on wood, I believe we have a very good record, and if you've had the chance to fly with us, you can speak to our staff, and you'll see how genuinely happy they are.
Okay, great, thank you. Scotty, how have you found the HR environment? Because you've got another angle on it, in that I think you said you were giving the opportunity for Philippine doctors and nurses to effectively come back and work at home rather than having to work overseas. Is that part of what you said you were enabling through your services. Tell us a bit more about that.
It's a funny thing in the world that, especially relating it to my own experience in the South Pacific, that if you look at the doctors in Australia, you'll find that they're probably all New Zealanders. If you look at the doctors in New Zealand, you'll probably find they're from the Philippines. If you look at the doctors in the Philippines, you'll find that they're wanting to go and work overseas. Now, what we're trying to do is reverse the trend, so that it's going to be a double hit for me, because I'll get all the New Zealanders back in New Zealand instead of being in Australia. But if we can attract the Philippine doctors back here, okay, we're only a small operation just now. We've got 9 doctors on the roster. But that would be a great start if we could get 9 doctors who have had overseas experience in America, in New Zealand, Australia, to come back into the country and remain in the country and teach the local people up to a higher standard. And this is part of our philosophy.
Okay, thanks, Scotty. Any comments or questions from the... Oh, Jeff, thank you. Jeff's got a...
I just had a quick comment based on some of the responses on labor, education, quality of talent pool in this area. I think it's somewhat of a misconception that Region 3 or Clark, Subic, these areas are kind of provincial and maybe there's not a lack of, or there's a lack of talent or lack of educational options. Of the 7 provinces within Region 3, 5 of them are Tier 1 by the NSO standards in terms of education, in terms of income per capita, affluency, all the various metrics that they use. Even more important than that is probably the fact that outside of the National Capital Region, the largest graduate numbers come out of Region 3. So the Capital Region's number 1, and then number 2 in the rest of the country is Region 3. So in terms of getting access to the best talent and wanting to retain that talent in where you're operating, this is probably an ideal location. And I think a lot of that has to do with the legacy left over from the military installations, which Dennis has talked about this before, but for year on year, for maybe 50 years, they recruited 2,000 Filipino men directly in the U.S. Navy as seamen. And the bases themselves were run by Filipinos. 20,000 here at Clark, 30,000 over in Subic. That legacy carried over to friends and family getting jobs in the bases, then their children being able to get educated. I think that has a lot to do with what you see today now with the amount of universities, technical institution, vocational programs that are here in this area and provide that talent pool.
Good, thanks very much for sharing, Jeff. Let me bring in Dennis then and ask for when people are prospective locators are talking to you about Global Gateway Logistics City, what are the sort of things that they're looking for that we don't have readily available? What are the gaps in not necessarily from Peregrine perspective, but in the overall value proposition for somebody coming in to either set up a logistics hub or set up an operational plant? You mentioned some great success stories. I think you said Samsung, Texas Instruments, Yokohama. What about the other guys? What are they hesitating about?
I'm going to come to that, but I have to comment on this labor issue.
Oh, please.